Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Connect, the podcast that focuses everything temperature controlled logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Brett Marshall, who I'm going to ask to introduce himself shortly. We're covering a wide variety of topics on the session today, focusing around resilience and innovation, quality and compliance, counterfeit medicines, packaging, monitoring, and a little bit of future outlook as well. So, Brett, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Going well, thanks, Thomas.
Good. So just to kick things off, and for people who haven't sort of met or heard you about you before, could you just give an overview of your history in the space and where you started and what you're currently doing today?
Sure. So I'm a logistics and supply chain practitioner of 35 years. I've spent 25 years of that working in the pharma space and 30 years living in Asia in different countries. I've travelled around Indonesia or worked in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines a couple of times, Bangladesh and Singapore. And I've been based in Singapore for the last bit over 10 years now. My previous role was as the head of quality, health, safety, security and the environment with one of Asia's largest pharma distributors, Pharma, and I spent 22 years working with them. So I spent most of the time moving around. I was working with them, and my experience in cold chain management, has been, a big part of what my role was, since working with Pharma.
Nice. Okay, good. And then more recently, you've transitioned into some steering group roles, editor-in-chief at Logisim, you're advisor and board member, I think, at the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society. So are those recent or are those things you've been working alongside things over the last couple of years?
I've been on the advisory board of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society for quite some time now. But it's really since I've stepped away from my previous role and as I'm working to build my own business. But in the meantime, also the role is a voluntary role because the organisation is a not-for-profit organisation. So it's really giving back to the industry and working as both the editor-in-chief of that organisation and also the chair of the Logisim APAC conference.
Right. The first area I wanted to cover with you was really around resilience and innovation. You've been in the industry a long time and you've been quite humble there in terms of the career you've had. You've had very senior positions at Zuleg, I know, and leadership roles, and you've spent a lot of time in quality, which is something I'm quite keen to cover. But if we start around COVID-19, we rewind to then, it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in supply chains. It was a big challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, certainly in my career, in terms of that time period. What do you believe we need to change or improve to sort of prevent future disruption, or hopefully that never comes around again? How can we improve things?
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting time, Thomas, and I think from a distributor's perspective and from a quality perspective, our number one priority was about maintaining supply of medicines to hospitals, pharmacies, drugstores, and that sort of thing. I think one of the things that really impacted us was that, certain countries made decisions to basically shut down their borders. And in the case of the Philippines, that happened with very little notice. So it was a big learning curve for us in that market. But what we learned, I think most importantly, was just how critical stakeholder management is in these situations and having a really good understanding of who your stakeholders are. Quite often you won't necessarily have strong links with certain areas of government, but when you work into a pandemic situation, then all the different elements of government need to collaborate, and you need to have communications in place with Department of Health and Department of Trade and even the Department of Defence, because there are certain parts of infrastructure that you may need to be able to lean on at certain stages. And that's on top of customs and law enforcement agencies, regulatory organisations themselves, the different levels of government, so national governments, provincial governments, local governments, and making sure that, different organisations are not making up rules as they go along. There's a cohesive set of processes in place. And then looking at that, not just in one country, but across all the markets, because the stakeholders can vary by market. So as an example, in the Philippines, the Department of Health was quite strong in the process of making decisions, but in Malaysia, it was the Ministry of Industry and Technology, which was placed at the forefront of decision making. So you might normally have a strong relationship with the Department of Health, but not necessarily with the Ministry of Industry and Trade. So making sure that you have a really detailed understanding of all those different players and then build the communication to those players, because in many cases it might be a more casual relationship. You need to start to put in place structures for what will happen when things go wrong.
We had a lot of experience in the UK directly during COVID, dealing with government and also trying to shore up supply. Our business, we're one of the largest manufacturers of viral and chemical barrier laminates. So we were involved with the gowns and sort of ICU hoods, etc. Actually, a lot going to the US. We found the collaboration extremely difficult, protracted, and it was one of the weakest parts. In terms of Asia or the region was it different or?
I think, yes, it was. I think in a number of markets, we were able to develop very strong relationships with other sector players and the government, the different elements of or components of government itself, also in ways that certainly didn't pre-exist prior to the pandemic. And I think importantly that those relationships have remained in place, and there's an understanding that to prepare for the future, you have to have plans in place. You have to understand what the players are, and everybody has their responsibilities clearly defined.
And when you say relationships, who are they within government, or is it with consulting firms? Is it advisory boards, or what did you find that worked?
No, it's actually with the organisations themselves. So it can be, you can be sitting in meetings with interagency meetings of government and have the different ministers or their representatives sitting at the table with you. So not so much on the consulting side, more on those who are the decision makers for policy and the implementation of that policy.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think the problem we had in the UK was a lot of it was driven by one of the large consultancies here in terms of the sourcing, supply. The expertise was sort of drained out of the decision making, and people were put in place who were sort of operational rather than experts in the topic that was being discussed. So I think that was quite a big learning from our side of the pond for sure. If we just move on to sort of innovation, obviously a lot of people on this podcast that we're talking to are talking around AI, they're talking about blockchain, IoT. Have you got any views on it as this new technology comes into place? And do you see, or have you got any foresight in terms of how it might reshape pharmaceutical logistics in the next 5 years, or which areas are going to be most impacted?
Yeah, I think because of the nature of pharmaceutical industry is that there's a lot of qualification and validation involved in new systems. So I think that's made it relatively slow in terms of the overall implementation of new technologies. But I would say the last 5 years we've seen that accelerate. I think there's been a big focus on digitization of quality management systems as a good example, where most of the manufacturers now have established QMS systems in place, and even the next layer of distribution partners and some of the 3PLs also. This means that the ability of quality-related information is able to travel much faster than it ever was before, because now that process is automated. But I think in terms of temperature monitoring of facilities, temperature monitoring of packaging systems and delivery vehicles, we've seen that technology evolve as well and become much more capable in terms of not just temperature, but humidity and shock, light, those types of attributes that devices can now measure, where they have digital fencing as well, so that location fencing for devices as well. So this is all information that needs to be managed and gathered, and then the connectivity of those devices into broader systems. And I think this is where the challenge for the industry lies, that there's still the end-to-end visibility that certainly doesn't exist for the industry at the moment. There are components of it which are being put in place, but the ability of disparate systems to communicate, I think, remains a challenge. That said, I think we do have greater transparency in terms of product movement and also the quality attributes of the product during transit from point of manufacture into the market. And we're starting also to see greater levels of transparency within the market itself for the legitimate side of the market. So hospitals, pharmacies, those types of things.
Yeah, no, it's well covered. I think that, one of the areas that is sort of predictive analytics as well in cold chain with AI, that we've seen some sort of machine learning being able to sort of look at to deep analyzing data, etc., is becoming more and more to the forefront, and we're still in early stages there. And I think there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of training, and there's a human element of learning how to utilize the technology as well, which is a big challenge for everyone. But I think the next couple of years change is coming, isn't it? So
absolutely. I mean, we've seen certainly the evolution of digital twins, which are helping us to create predictive kind of situations and look at the attributes of packaging in certain situations that we didn't have visibility of before. And I think that also expands to, dealing with the types of disruptions that we're starting to experience on a day-to-day basis, that we can start to predict, using the data that is available. And the quality of the data is always important, but it helps us to understand what are the demand triggers, and then how does the supply chain respond to those demand triggers, and how do we move product in a way that maintains quality and the efficacy for the patients that it reach.
Yeah. Okay, good. And I think just moving on to quality, I know it's one of your main areas. I mean, you were corporate head of QA and HSSE at Zuleg, and I think I read that you had a team of 200 plus staff and 15 direct reports and 15 business units on this topic. So you were there in that role for 10 years. So I wanted to sort of get into quality, obviously. But to start things off, what's the biggest misconception about quality assurance in healthcare logistics?
I think it's the perception that quality is a policeman, and that, quality people are there to slow processes down rather than make them more efficient. And I think, that's an unfortunate view, because my view has always been that quality brings value and adds value to the process. It brings the perspective of managing risk more effectively. And so these are attributes that can be built into day-to-day processes, rather than so that, it's not just day-to-day operations, but it's also major project implementations, making sure you ask the questions about what can potentially go wrong, and then preparing yourself to address those issues when they arise, rather than getting halfway through the implement and having one of those moment, not knowing what to do. That's one of the key responsibilities of the quality team. I think also it's building trust with the clients that we're working with.
I was just going to jump in and just ask whether, in terms of that misconception piece, how do you deal with that across departments? Because I presume when you're talking about that, you're talking about commercial and quality having a disconnect in terms of how they see each other, or there's friction there between departments, or what do you mean when there is sort of misconceptions? How does it play out?
Yeah, well, I think especially around there are moments where deviations occur, and the ability of people to deal with deviations, investigate a deviation correctly, prepare the right CAPA, the right corrective and preventive action response for such a deviation is really quite important. But I think also it very much underlines the need for cross-functional collaboration, and making sure that the why is clearly understood. When it comes to quality, the why is very simply that, the reason we do what we do is because we're providing medicines for patients. So those medicines and the quality of those medicines needs to be maintained. Those medicines can be consumed by, people that very close to you. So you make the whole why quite personal in that sense. Could be your family, could be, your neighbours, could be part of your community, people that you work with. And I think that makes a difference when you start to talk about the importance of behaving in certain ways, that it brings a relationship to all the different levels that you're working with.
Yeah, in terms of the quality piece, when you were at Zuleg, what were the biggest challenges you faced in running that department?
I think because we were building a quality management system from the ground up. We were going through a period where we were having some challenging relationships with clients with respect to some of the quality performance in some of the markets, and we needed to be seen to take strong action. So coming into the role for the first time and being able to build an understanding of how we put together a quality management system that will be able to work in the specific markets as well as be managed from a regional level. So what does that mean? That means looking at all the different regulations that abound, the international regulations as well as the local regulations, and trying to build that into one cohesive quality management system that really manages the expectations of regulators and clients as well as customers without having to have individual quality, not trying to meet individual quality parameters. And I think that's quite important, because if you have 50 clients and you're trying to operate in 50 different ways for those clients, then obviously you have a highly variable process. Variability means risk. Variability means very challenging to train people. So we really look to reduce that variability through setting the right benchmark in terms of the processes and procedures that we have for the quality management system, which covers the way that you operate the business, the way that you work with the packaging systems for cold chain material, the way you operate risk management, the delivery process, the qualification of the partners that you use, and those types of things. So really not looking just at local standards, but looking at how organisations like ICH, PICS, and then industry bodies like the PDA, and they'll kill me for forgetting it, ISPE. But, these industry bodies also create a lot of great material around how to design process correctly. And whereas you get guidance from the international procedures themselves, really the way to work comes from the guidance of those international organisations. So building that into your QMS as well, and then being able to look at the changes that are potentially coming, to different regulations, and anticipate those changes, decide how it's going to impact your process set, and then prepare yourself so you can design your processes so that they're basically audit ready. When a client says, I now want you to do this, you're already there. You've already documented it in your SOP, you've trained your people, and your operation is already reflecting that. So being able to anticipate change, I think, was really important to, helping us to create value from quality. It also helped us to be able to be seen as a relative expert and a trusted partner of our clients. We were really building that peer relationship rather than in competition with one another.
Yeah. I mean, we're a manufacturer, and our quality management system effectively drives our business. So we're very regulated and heavily involved in this. We find that the quality management system is set, and then it builds out as you sort of progress, as you say. But we're a UK unit here. when you're building out a QMS as a global business across regions and geos and everything else, what are the biggest hurdles in terms of making sure that's robust, it's as foolproof as it can be?
I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, the degree to which local regulation varies against what international regulation is. And I think that's one of the areas that PICS in particular has been very helpful, in the sense that the membership, particularly in Asia, is expanding. So many of the countries being PICS members are adopting those guidelines into their regulatory systems. And so that brings, it's not harmonization in its truest form, it's convergence, but it makes it a lot easier because you have much less variability at local level. I think the second thing is probably the cultural diversity, and making sure that the way that we implement the QMS takes sensitivities to the way that certain cultures are working, and that, you know, the training, the approach to training and the approach to education is sensitive to the different cultural sensitivities. Some markets are very quick to adopt. Some are a little more careful and a little more sometimes wanting to go in detail to investigate what an SOP might mean before they implement. So, you know, you need to be able to work between these cultural variations as well. And I think also importantly, the education level, typically the education level in many of the distributions that we will operate will be quite simple. So we need to, when it comes down to the training and education again, we need to make sure that the messaging that we have and the ability to execute is clearly understood at the lowest level.
Yeah, for sure. I think training's come up time and time again as it can be a weak spot, but it's the one that if you get right, it really helps. It's either third-party supplier or in-house; they're equally as important. Everyone's
Yeah.
Okay. I've also was looking through some of the work you were doing. You've written about the threat of counterfeit medicines before. How big is the problem today, and what strategies or how can we overcome it? Because it's not an area I've really covered, so I was interested to cover this one with you today.
Yeah, I think counterfeits and falsified and substandard medicines remains a critical problem today. The exact dollar value of it, there's no precise formula, so it's somewhere between 10 billion and 200 billion, depending on who you talk to. But the World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 10 medicinal products, particularly in low to middle income countries, are falsified or substandard medicines. So 10% of every medicine that's being consumed or being tested.
Yeah. How do they get into supply? How do they get into the supply chain, Brett?
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge. We have what we call the legitimate supply chain, which tier one distributors are responsible, or wholesalers are responsible for managing. And they generally have the systems in place, the processes in place, the training in place to be able to monitor product through to the end customer, not necessarily to the patient. Counterfeit products tend to come in through less formal channels. So it could be coming in through smuggling points that exist predominantly through Asia, but it also could be as simple as coming in through a suitcase on an aircraft. And so these can be really quite difficult to detect. And I think that tends to be the challenge, that the porous nature of some of the borders means that mainly second tier and below wholesalers tend to be the distribution or become the distribution points for these medications. What drives patients to consume such medications? There's probably a couple of different reasons. 3 that I can think of. One is education, because understanding that certain medicines are or can be dangerous, and that if the price looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So it's the education of patients. I think it's also the accessibility to quality healthcare and quality medications, which can vary across geographies within countries. And I think the third point is just that some markets will look at that price differential. Medications can be quite expensive, and so patients will take advantage of lower prices, thinking that they're making a sound purchase, but they're not.
Yeah.
So those are probably three of the key areas.
Are there certain regions in the world that are more susceptible or to this counterfeit medicine market, or is it like really a global issue?
Yeah, it is certainly a global issue, but there is probably far higher risk in the low to middle income countries, particularly in Africa, Asia, and in Latin America. But you will still see counterfeit products in the US, in Europe, in Australia and New Zealand.
Right. Okay. And what role can regulators and private companies play? What do you think they're doing well, and what do you think they could improve on in this area?
I think this is, I talked about stakeholder management earlier when we were talking about the pandemic, and I think this is an area that also requires very strong collaboration between all the stakeholders. And I had the opportunity one time to sit in an anti-counterfeit program launch in Manila in the Philippines, which was being run by the Philippine FDA. And what that experience really emphasized to me, because in that room we had customs, we had law enforcement agencies, national and local levels, different representatives from the government, from the House of Representatives and the Senate. We had from the different regulatory organisations, there were representatives from the manufacturers, from the distributors. So there's really a massive stakeholder footprint around this issue, and sharing information and being able to communicate about the risks that exist, the opportunities for training of the enforcement agencies, including the customs organisations, how we adopt better detection technologies, and also how we adopt more kind of price-friendly detection opportunities. So what I mean by that is, with the serialization that's being implemented across the industry, more sophisticated labeling of products that allows patients and healthcare practitioners to scan the packaging, whether it's the unit packaging or the secondary packaging, to be able to detect whether it's from a legitimate manufacturer or not. There's a range of issues and a range of areas that need to be very clearly discussed and shared between those different stakeholders, because there's a lot of experience, not just in the pharma sector, but there's experience that can also be learned from the tobacco industry, the wine and spirits industry, even the gold industry. So there's a lot of other industries that share issues that they have, and how collectively we organise with government and with customers and ultimately with patient groups as well.
In terms of the trend of counterfeit medicines going into the market, is it on the up, or are we winning that battle, or are we losing it? How's it played out with this?
I honestly think that it's not a battle we're winning at the moment. And, we've mentioned some of the detection technologies that are being implemented to try and improve that detection process. But, the threat actors in this space, they can adopt technologies or develop technologies just as quickly as the legitimate channels. So this is one of the risks. I think also informal markets and online opportunities, we need to be careful, because there's quite a bit of counterfeit activity that can move through those channels as well.
Yeah. Okay, for sure. All right. Just moving on to packaging, technology, monitoring. Obviously, with quality, it's a massive part of that sector and that job role. I want to start with active versus passive packaging, and where you see, or which of those you see delivering the most value over the next few years. And do you think one sector of packaging will be primarily picked up by certain companies or or supply chains versus others?
Yeah, I don't think this is a case of kind of one size fits all, to be honest. I think that there will always be opportunities and needs for active systems. The active systems, particularly for air transport, were probably more prevalent in the past. And if I talk about air, focusing on air as the modal transport for the moment. But I think the evolution of technologies in passive packaging systems has been quite extraordinary over the last probably 5 to 10 years, and that we now have quite sophisticated capabilities and more sustainably friendly capabilities for packaging systems that can maintain temperatures, out as far as 96 hours or 120 hours or even 140 plus hours, which I think is quite extraordinary. So this has great impact on movement of product from manufacturing to market, but also, but with the experience that I've had previously, we also, as a company, started to implement the new generation of passive packaging systems in our organisation as well. Started in Vietnam, had great success for shipments between Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. We were able to replace air freight with road freight using these systems. We were also able to replace the phone packaging systems that we were using. And so for customer deliveries, they were replaced as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's greater opportunity for the passive systems, both those that are VIP, vacuum insulated panels and phase change materials, as well as some of the other solutions that are being developed using more natural materials as well. So I see that the packaging systems the evolution is moving in a really good direction. I see that will continue because the in-market logistics is, especially in Asia, is still building out in that space.
Yeah, and I think that obviously we manufacture phase change material, PCM, thermal blankets is our business. And I'm always fascinated to understand from a quality perspective, we tend to deal with commercial or that role as our primary contact. But from a QA perspective, how do you validate packaging? What are you looking for from a supplier when you're looking at a new piece of packaging technology? And how do you, what are the key steps that really a packaging manufacturer needs to go through in order for approval?
Yeah, I think this is where the International Safe Transit Association, ISTA, has done some excellent work in kind of documenting the processes that need to be managed by both the suppliers as well as the customers of these solutions. So that's helped strengthen, I think, the different stages of validation and qualification. So design and installation and operational qualification is generally what we will get from a supplier these days. In the past, we may have had to put the operational qualification ourselves, but generally with the different technologies and the thermal room the vendors have for also working through those steps of qualification has helped us. So the key area for us is really that performance qualification step. But certainly as a part of qualifying a supplier, we'll be looking at how they support the qualification process.
And is there, when you think of thermal packaging or you think of sort of data loggers or real-time monitoring or any of these areas, is there, in the last sort of 5 years, as you just said, is there one piece of technology that you think really has exploded or you see the biggest opportunity with over the next 2 or 3 years?
I think we're now starting to see some really nice technology in terms of the monitoring devices and the capabilities that they've had. I think in the past, there were always some challenges around balancing the data storage capability, the active phase in, at what point do they send signals or alerts, and the battery size. That was the challenge. And I think also the communications infrastructure that exists in the markets and the ability of those signals to be sent or received with reliability. This was a challenge in the past, but I think that those challenges are starting to be addressed. In my time, it was an area, because at one stage we had something like 35 different devices across 15 or 16 different vendors in, the 16 or 17 countries we had. So we did work on a project to shrink the number of vendors and the number of devices that we had. It was quite successful, not perfect, but it was quite successful. And so that allowed us to develop a set of cardinal requirements that we had for vendor solutions. So the areas that we had challenges around were the ability of the devices to send signals or us to receive the signal when there was an alert, their ability to provide the qualification documentation, validation documentation, some of the calibration issues, even the communication, the GPS versus 3-point triangulation could be a challenge. GPS in this part of the world still is not perfect. So more of a lean towards 3-point triangulation for accuracy. But I think, as I say, and in terms of developing a real-time device, real-time data collection has never really been the issue. It's the ability to create a real-time alert, and this comes back to the battery power. And these devices still remain quite expensive. So, you really have to decide at what point the risk value equation do you want to use these types of devices all the time. But I still think that that maybe not necessarily real-time alerts, although they can be developed through linking the device to IoT cell phone capabilities. And so there are ways to bring much more visibility of the risk for transport, particularly in market. I think the manufacturer to market leg is pretty robust, but it's the in-market logistics step that needs to be better managed.
Yeah, right. And I think the real-time alerts is the sort of holy grail. I think companies there are ways of doing it, but it's not particularly easy, and especially when you're shipping, well, say by air or even by ocean in a reefer, in its very nature, you have a steel outer, or you have and so actually getting GPS or getting real-time activation from just the nature of the beast is so difficult. But obviously, from a quality department, it would be a phenomenal step to be able to get live reports, isn't it? So hopefully it will come. Okay, I think that just on the last couple of points here, Brett, I just wanted to just move on to sustainability and decarbonisation, really, as the last section. I just wanted to ask some questions to you on, if that was all right. So in terms of decarbonisation, that part, what practical steps can companies take to balance sustainability with cost and compliance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think particularly when we're talking around cold chain, there's such a massive area of energy consumption. So that's really where we focus our attention. From a storage perspective, making sure that the warehouses that we have, the insulation on the external building is strong enough to take the pressure off the actual cold room inside the facility. So it's managing the internal temperature of the broader facility. That includes the heat reflective paint that you might use on the roof, the ability to use solar panels also on the roofs and start to build your renewable energy capability. Systems and energy management systems being implemented so that you can manage the load that's required during the day. Intelligent lighting systems in warehouses and in cold rooms. The improved cooling systems and the low ozone content cooling gases that are now available, and building those into the cooling systems. And I've seen recently here in Singapore that they're looking at how they use carbon dioxide, which is an even more environmentally friendly gas for the cooling system. And then the preparation of the packaging systems as well, and the move away from styrofoam boxes. We had, I don't know, more than 12,000, 15,000 styro boxes, I guess, in the past. we've replaced half in my time. When I left, they'd already replaced half of those with passive packaging systems, the new versions of the passive packaging system. So they had 5,000-6,000 units of those. And, being able to, the multiple use that you have out of those systems versus single use systems, I think is a huge asset as well. I think we originally thought that we'd get between 4 and 5 years. We've found that, with the right maintenance and the right handling and care, that we can get, 5 to 6 years of usable service out of these packaging systems, which is extraordinary. So those are some of the key areas. And then the vehicles that are being used for, using more environmentally friendly EVs or supported by biofuels as well, is an area that will continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think the packaging piece is interesting, because I think that the industry started around single use and everything else, and the companies that are taking are really expanding and offering the most value are ones who have multi-sites, multi-regions, and a reuse or rental program. Because I think gone are the days where Pharma will accept a single-use product into their supply chain. They need to see either the ability for the supplier to reuse the system, or for the forwarder or 3PL to be involved in that process. But there's as you've talked about, various stakeholders are all involved in making sure that packaging is continually recycled as it goes through multiple years. And you've talked about 5 or 6 years there, which is a phenomenal number. And hopefully we can get it up closer to 10, there's no reason why not. Just my last question in terms of future outlook, what emerging risks do you foresee in the next 3 years, sort of beyond pandemics and everything else? Is there anything that worries you about supply chain, cold chain, logistics in pharma that you think would be worth talking about?
I think that the future for pharma looks quite robust. I think that post-pandemic, one of the other areas that has had a lot of focus is the manufacturing sector and the ability to manufacture closer to patient consumption, and that's certainly had an impact in Asia as well as Africa, and I think Latin America also. Whereas during globalization we saw centralization of manufacturing, we're now kind of seeing that diversify a little bit, which I think is good for it's a good opportunity for the future. I guess the great challenge is around the continual state of disruption that we live in, with geopolitical disputes and some of the modal disruptions that we've had, and that's just a fact of life. I think one of the things that the pharma industry does really well is manage risk, I think, and take a risk-aware approach to manufacturing process as well as distribution process. So I think as we continue to formalize that process and use technology more effectively for managing and preparing for risk, we should be in a good place. I don't see major risks for the industry, to be honest. I think that the regional development of Africa and Asia and Latin America in particular is really important. I think, the reshoring that's taking place with the US, I think will actually have a positive impact for Asia.
Right. Okay, good. Lovely. Well, we're out of time. So, Brett, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a really great session, actually, and we covered a massive amount. So, and I know it's the evening your time. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Thomas.
So you've been listening to Cold Chain Connect. My name's Thomas Hunt, and we've been on with Brett Marshall today. Tune in next week for our next episode, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.